The world ended not with a bang, but a bite. It was a day like any other, the sun setting over the city, casting long shadows in the alleys. People were going about their business, unaware of the impending doom. The air was thick with the usual sounds of city life, the distant hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the occasional siren. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, something sinister was brewing. One minute, life was normal, the next, chaos. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The streets once bustling with activity were now scenes of pandemonium. People were running in every direction, their faces masks of terror. Screams filled the air, a cacophony of fear and confusion. Cars were abandoned, some overturned, their contents spilling onto the asphalt. The transformation was swift and brutal. Screams ripped through the air, replacing the familiar hum of city life. The sound was deafening, a symphony of despair. People clutched at each other, seeking comfort in the midst of the chaos. The city, once a symbol of human achievement, had become a battleground. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and fear. It was a scene from a nightmare, but it was all too real. The dead walked, hungry, their eyes vacant and cold. They moved with a purpose, driven by an insatiable hunger. Their presence was a stark reminder of the fragility of life. The streets, once filled with the living, were now the domain of the dead. The fog rolled in, adding an eerie quality to the already terrifying scene. The city was unrecognizable, a shadow of its former self. I was at work, staring out the window, watching the horror unfold. The office, once a place of productivity and routine, had become a prison. My colleagues and I were trapped, helpless witnesses to the carnage outside. The glass pane separated us from the chaos, but it did little to shield us from the fear. The scenes of destruction played out like a macabre movie, each frame more horrifying than the last. People running, some collapsing, the lucky ones. They managed to find shelter, to hide from the horrors that roamed the streets. But for many, there was no escape. They fell where they stood, their bodies littering the streets. The survivors huddled behind cars, in alleyways, anywhere they could find a semblance of safety. The city had become a maze of fear, each corner hiding potential danger. The unlucky ones, they got back up, different, twisted. The transformation was grotesque, a perversion of life. Their faces, once familiar, were now twisted into masks of horror. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their eyes devoid of any humanity. The sight was enough to drive anyone to the brink of madness. The city was no longer a place of the living, it had become a realm of the undead. Instinct took over. I barricaded myself in the office. The sound of hammering boards was a small comfort, a way to keep the terror at bay. The office, once a place of routine, had become a fortress. Each piece of furniture, each nail driven into the door, was a barrier against the nightmare outside. The darkness of the office was both a comfort and a curse, hiding me from the horrors but also isolating me in my fear. Days turned into nights. The stench of death seeped in from under the door, a constant reminder of the nightmare outside. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows, each one a potential threat. Exhaustion set in, but sleep was elusive. The sounds of the undead, the occasional scream, kept me on edge. The hallway outside was a no-man's land, littered with decaying bodies. The office had become a tomb, a place of waiting. Finally, silence. I peeked out the window. The streets were littered with bodies, both living and dead. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had reigned before. The city, once alive with activity, was now a graveyard. The bodies, twisted and broken, were a testament to the horror that had unfolded. The silence was a small mercy, a brief respite from the nightmare. It was time to move, to find others, to survive. The city was a wasteland, but there was hope. Somewhere out there, others were fighting to survive. The journey would be perilous, but staying was not an option. With a backpack of supplies and a heart full of determination, I stepped out into the unknown. The city, once a place of dreams, was now a battleground. But in the midst of the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope. Survival was the only option, and I was ready to fight for it. The city was a graveyard. Once bustling with life, now it lay in eerie silence, a testament to the chaos that had unfolded. The streets, once filled with the sounds of laughter and traffic, were now empty, echoing only the whispers of the wind. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a constant reminder of the lives lost and the battles fought. Buildings stood like hollow eyes watching. Their broken windows and crumbling facades told stories of destruction and despair. Each structure, a silent witness to the horrors that had taken place, seemed to mourn the loss of its former glory. The skyscrapers, once symbols of human achievement, now loomed like dark sentinels over the desolate landscape. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking horror. The alleys, once shortcuts for busy commuters, had become treacherous paths where danger hid in every corner. The darkness was alive, shifting and moving, playing tricks on the mind. It was as if the city itself had become a predator, waiting to pounce on the unwary. I scavenged for supplies, food, water, anything to help me survive. Each day was a struggle, a fight against hunger and thirst. The stores, once brimming with goods, were now empty shells, their shelves picked clean by desperate hands. Every find, no matter how small, was a victory, a lifeline in this harsh new world. Days later I found them, a small group, holed up in a supermarket. They were like me, survivors clinging to the hope of a better tomorrow. The supermarket, once a place of mundane errands, had become a fortress, a sanctuary from the chaos outside. It was here that I met the people who would become my new family. John, the leader, a man hardened by the apocalypse. His eyes, once filled with kindness, now held a steely resolve. He had seen too much, lost too many, but he refused to give up. His strength and determination were a beacon of hope for the rest of us, a reminder that we could still fight, still survive. Sarah, a doctor, her eyes filled with a weary hope. She had dedicated her life to saving others, and even in this new world she continued to do so. Her medical skills were invaluable, but it was her compassion and kindness that truly set her apart. She was a light in the darkness, a reminder of the humanity we were fighting to preserve. And Mark, a young kid, barely a teenager, clinging to his sanity. The apocalypse had stolen his childhood, but not his spirit. He was brave, resourceful, and determined to survive. His innocence, though battered, was a precious thing, a symbol of the future we were all fighting for. We joined forces, our numbers, a small comfort in this new world. Together, we were stronger, more resilient. We shared our resources, our knowledge, and our hope. Each day was a battle, but we faced it together, united by our common goal, survival. We decided to head north, to the mountains, away from the city, away from the dead. The journey would be long and perilous, but it was our best chance. The mountains promised safety, a place where we could start anew. As we walked, the city faded into the distance, a haunting memory of the world we had left behind. We were escaping from hell, but we were also moving towards hope, towards a future where we could rebuild and reclaim our lives. The journey was long. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of our past was dragging us down. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of trees and shadows that swallowed us whole. We were driven by a singular purpose, to find a place, any place, where we could rest and feel safe, even if just for a moment. Days bled into each other, walking, scavenging, surviving. The routine was monotonous, yet it was our lifeline. We searched through the remnants of a world that once was, hoping to find anything that could sustain us. Food, water, tools. Each discovery was a small victory in our ongoing battle for survival. We avoided the main roads, sticking to the shadows, always moving. The main roads were too dangerous, too exposed. We had learned the hard way that visibility meant vulnerability. So we moved through the underbrush, our senses heightened, always alert for any sign of danger. The forest became our ally, its darkness, our shield. The silence was broken only by the crunch of gravel under our feet and the constant, gnawing fear. Every sound, every rustle of leaves set our hearts racing. The fear was a constant companion, a reminder of the peril that lurked in every shadow. Yet it was this fear that kept us alive, kept us moving. One day we stumbled upon it. It was like a mirage in the desert, an unexpected oasis in our endless journey. Our hearts leaped with a mix of hope and caution. Could this be the refuge we so desperately needed? An old hunting cabin nestled deep in the woods. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. The walls were weathered, the roof sagging, but it stood there, a testament to resilience. It was a place that had withstood the test of time, and now it offered us a glimmer of hope. It was run down, but it offered shelter. In that moment, it was the most beautiful sight we had seen in weeks. A place where we could finally rest, even if just for a night. We approached it cautiously, our eyes scanning for any signs of danger. A roof over our heads, a fragile barrier between us and the horrors outside. The inside was as dilapidated as the exterior, but it was dry and it was ours, if only for a short while. We could hear the wind howling outside, but inside we felt a semblance of peace. We barricaded the windows, reinforced the doors. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind made us jump, but we worked together, turning the cabin into a fortress. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make us feel secure, if only for a fleeting moment. For a moment we could breathe. The tension in our shoulders eased, and we allowed ourselves to relax. We shared stories, laughed softly, and for the first time in a long while, we felt a sense of normalcy. It was a brief respite, but it was enough to rekindle our spirits. The silence of the woods, a welcome change from the city's screams. The forest, once a place of fear, now felt like a sanctuary. The absence of human noise was a balm to our weary souls. We knew this peace was temporary, but in that moment it was everything we needed. Days turned into weeks. We settled into a routine. John and I scavenged for supplies. Sarah tended to the wounded, both physical and emotional. Mark kept watch, his young eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The fear was always there, a constant undercurrent to our days. The world outside our small haven was a constant threat. But inside these walls, we found a semblance of normalcy. We ate together, shared stories, clung to the remnants of hope. Section 5, Scars of the Past. John, I learned, had lost his family when the outbreak hit. His wife and daughter, gone. His grief was a heavy cloak he wore, a constant reminder of what we were all fighting for, or rather what we had already lost. Sarah, too, carried her own demons. She had seen too much death, too much suffering. Her hands, though gentle, trembled with the weight of the lives she couldn't save. We were all broken in our own ways, but we were alive, and for now, that was enough. Section 6, Trust Issues. As days turned into weeks, a new kind of fear began to creep in. The fear of the unknown, the fear of each other. Supplies were dwindling, whispers started, doubts were sown. Mark, his young mind frayed by the constant tension, started seeing things. Shadows moving in the woods, whispers in the night. John grew increasingly distant, his grief turning into a cold fury. He pushed us harder, further, on scavenging runs. His trust, once a lifeline, was now a thread ready to snap. Section 7, The Calm Before the Storm. One evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled like a banshee, shaking the cabin to its core. Thunder cracked, illuminating the sky in a blinding white light. We huddled together, our faces pale in the flickering candlelight. The storm felt like a bad omen, a harbinger of something worse to come. The air crackled with tension, thick with unspoken fear. We all knew it, felt it in our bones. Something was coming. Section 8, Night of Terror. Then it began. A low moan carried on the wind. We exchanged nervous glances. It wasn't the wind. The moan grew louder, joined by others. A chorus of the damned. The dead were upon us. John's face hardened. He grabbed his axe. They're here. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Panic surged through the cabin. We scrambled for weapons, anything to defend ourselves. The moans were right outside the door now, scratching, clawing. Section 9, Last Stand. The door burst open. A wave of rotting flesh surged inside. John met them head-on, his axe a blur of motion. Sarah, her face pale but resolute, fired her pistol. Mark, his eyes wide with terror, swung a rusty pipe. We fought with the desperation of the damned. Every swing, every shot fueled by adrenaline and fear. But for every one we put down, more seemed to rise from the darkness. Section 10, Descent into Darkness. We were overrun. John barked an order, basement, now! We scrambled down the rickety stairs, slamming the trapdoor shut behind us. The sounds of chaos raged above us, the moans of the dead, the splintering wood, the desperate cries of the living. We huddled together in the darkness, our chests heaving. The air was thick with the smell of blood and fear. We were trapped like rats in a cage. Section 11, No Escape. Silence fell. An eerie, unsettling silence, then I heard it, a soft thud. Footsteps, they were inside. John's face, illuminated by a flickering candle, was a mask of despair. It's over, he whispered, his voice hollow. We're done. He was right. There was nowhere left to run, no escape from this nightmare. We were out of time. The dead had won.